Over the years, the city of Lethbridge has been economically stable, attracting a wide variety of businesses. The business community here is somewhat unique in our province as we have diverse economic drivers, including our flourishing agriculture industry. We wanted to check in with Trevor Lewington, who is the CEO of Economic Development Lethbridge, to find out how the city of Lethbridge has been faring over the past while and what lies ahead for the summer months. Trevor, welcome back to Bridge City News.
Great to be here. Thanks for having me.
So let's just start off by touching base on the recent provincial election, because it was a very, very close race with the UCP coming out on top, of course. What are you hearing from the business community as a whole, and how will this affect our economy for better or worse?
Well, I do think the business community collectively breathes a sigh of relief anytime an election is over. Doesn't matter who wins, elections are inherently unstable times, and you never know quite what's going to happen. So having an election over and done with is always good from a business perspective. The UCP government, part of their campaign, one of their key promises was to keep corporate taxes low. They're very focused on maintaining Alberta, frankly, is one of the most competitive tax jurisdictions, not just in Canada, but across North America. So that's generally good news for business. We do know that talent or workforce is one of the key concerns of the business community, continues to be, has been for a long time. And that's usually more a function of quality of life factors. So things like access to healthcare, education, recreational opportunities. So I fully expect that the business community is going to be looking to the UCP to take quick and decisive action to improve those issues and sort of ensure that Alberta becomes a good place for people to come and live. And ultimately, it doesn't matter what government's in power. There's always going to be variables like a war in Europe that no one really anticipated, like unprecedented inflation, that governments must respond to. So every government, regardless of policies and ideology, needs to be somewhat flexible and needs to be adaptable to the times that are ahead. So yeah, good. At least we've got a result. We've got a stable majority government, and we know, I think, what we're dealing with.
Good. And are there any specific changes you would like to see coming from the provincial governments that you feel would help Lethbridge businesses?
Yeah, last fall we conducted our fourth annual Brighter Together business survey, and repeatedly businesses have told us there are a couple of concerns that bubble to the top for them on their radar. One, of course, is the affordability of utilities specifically, and the second being that workforce availability piece. So, for us locally, the good news, I think, is that the Lethbridge East MLA, Nathan Newdorf, was appointed the Minister of Affordability and Utilities. So he certainly has his work cut out for him. But addressing the cost of utilities, transmission and distribution costs, and ensuring a reliable grid as electrification continues without placing that burden on industry, I think is going to be one of the key challenges that he'll hear from the business community. And from a workforce perspective, the province has a number of immigration programs. So recently we just launched the Rural Renewal Stream and the Rural Entrepreneur Stream of the Alberta Advantage Immigration Program, or AAIP. And that's one attempt to try and provide more opportunities for foreign workers, actually, to be available, and so that we can tap into that talent here locally in Lethbridge. And then the final thing I think that we need to be mindful of, or certainly I would counsel the province to be thinking of as they look at Lethbridge. 3 of our 5 largest major employers are the university, the college, and Alberta Health Services. We are predominantly a public sector community and economy. And so when the government makes budget reductions in those areas, it could be quite painful for the local economy. And,
Right.
Excited to see prior to the election, the government looking to reinvest in education, reinvest in our post-secondaries, and reinvest in healthcare. So I think that will, in turn, put more money into those institutions and help our economy locally.
Now, our downtown core always has the challenges of keeping the area safe and reducing drug use and the crime associated with this. What are you hearing from business owners and the public on this issue?
Yeah, there's no question that downtown safety continues to be a concern, not only for the public, but also for the business community. And we have to be mindful of, perception versus reality. But it's complex, right? There's social issues, there's housing issues, there's safety issues. So my advice to the business community is continue to speak out, continue to ask questions, use the organizations that are there to represent them, like the Chamber of Commerce, as well as the Downtown Business Revitalization Zone. I know in particular the BRZ, for example, has expressed concern to the city about how enforcement of public nuisance bylaws are actually happening and what's the track record there. So enforcement's certainly part of the answer. Studies, of course, have shown that You need to get people off the streets. You need to get them into attainable and suitable housing with appropriate supports. That's actually far cheaper than people going through the criminal justice system and having to rely on emergency services. So, I really think one of the key challenges ahead, not only for the province, is also the city to work more closely together. Housing and homelessness is, predominantly a provincial jurisdiction, but the reality is we see it in our downtown, and it's the city of Lethbridge that must respond. And so those two levels of government are going to have to work much tighter together to try and work through some practical solutions.
And can you just give us an update on what our job numbers are looking like this spring, and how does that compare over the last few years?
Yeah, great question. So the unemployment rate in May actually rose to 5.3% for the Lethbridge Census metropolitan area. That's actually the fifth consecutive monthly increase. And so we're now at the highest level of unemployment since April of 2022. Now, that's not necessarily the worst thing. Prior to this, we were down around the 3% mark, which is a very tight labor market, very challenging for employers to hire people. So having a higher unemployment rate actually means there's more people that are potentially available in the workforce. Although last month employment fell by about 2,200 jobs, and we're down almost 5,900 jobs since the beginning of the year. So it's not a good trend. It's something we're watching very closely. And what's really driving that is something called the participation rate. So that's when people either drop out of the workforce or stop looking for work. Now, that can be things like retirements, that can be people returning back to school. But our participation rate is down 5.8% since the beginning of the year, and it compares very unfavorably to previous years. So that's something that's a bigger concern to me, is that people are either giving up hope or they're just stepping away from the workforce. And in an already tight labor market where we have lots of job vacancies, people not engaging in the workforce is a really big concern for us. Specifically, wholesale and retail trade was the bulk of the losses this month. That sector was down almost 1,600 jobs. So not really sure what drove that in the last month. Something we'll definitely have to keep an eye on. Again, month to month, the economy changes, things happen. We're more interested in the long-term trends, but jobs are down since the beginning of the year and unemployment is up, which is the concern.
And what would it take to reverse those numbers?
Yeah, I mean, we have seen, thankfully, gains in manufacturing, for example. So manufacturing added 500 jobs last month. And actually, since the beginning of the year, the manufacturing sector is up almost 3,000 positions. So we've seen huge job growth there. Construction is another area that suffered a little bit in the last couple of years, particularly with COVID. Construction was up 500 positions last month. So that's, again, a little bit of sunshine coming into that puzzle. Again, for us, it's working with employers to understand what the barriers are. Like I said, our last survey indicated workforce availability was a challenge, but also affordability of utilities. So what are those other things that are keeping businesses from expanding? What are some of those other costs that perhaps are preventing people from hiring? That's what we've got to explore.
And one of our main economic drivers in our area is the agriculture sector. So can you just tell us, how are things looking over there?
Yeah, last year was a phenomenal year for the agriculture sector. So farmers across Alberta actually recognized an all-time high for net income. Net income for the agriculture sector was 3.3 billion. Again, never seen that level before. And that's great news when you think about last year in the context of skyrocketing inflation. Operating expenses for our growers was astronomical, but they were able to offset that. So yields were higher than they've been. Higher commodity prices helped bring additional revenues to farmers to offset those expenses. So that was great. Lethbridge, we also saw double-digit growth in our exports. So exports from the Lethbridge region, which are typically manufactured goods, but a lot of agri-food, were up almost 23% to just over $2.16 billion, which is the highest level we've seen.
Wow.
So that's the good news. This year, though, things are not quite as rosy. So we know that the weather is a bit of a concern. We've already seen drought-like conditions across a good chunk of the province. A number of growers have expressed concerns about what crops and yields could look like if there isn't sufficient rain. So yields may not be what they were last year. And certainly when you have Russia continuing its aggression and its invasion of Ukraine, that's a challenge for global commodity prices and demand, because the Ukraine is such a significant player in terms of the agricultural exports. So lots of uncertainty in the ag space. We're still in a good position, but whether that's the biggest question mark at this point, I think.
And what's the latest with the agribusiness hub and trade center? Is it causing more businesses to look towards Lethbridge as a market?
Yeah, it's a little too early to tell right now. I mean, the agri-food hub is going along well. The team over at the Lethbridge and District Exhibition is actually planning their grand opening for August the 10th. So the building is not yet operational. It will be very, very soon. Well, it's exciting to kick off the summer and whoop up days with the opening of that brand new facility. And why it's exciting, I think, really it's a state of the art, it's a world class venue that will allow us to attract much bigger events to Lethbridge. We're hoping to attract the attention of various national and international organizations and trade associations and industry groups. And so the long term vision for that facility, the Agri Food Hub, is really going to be a showcase of what Southern Alberta can do. It's going to be a place where we can bring innovators and collaborators together. And of course, that very much fits into this idea of Canada's premier food corridor along Highway 3. And of course, the Agri Food Hub is going to be that building is very much going to be at the hub of that food corridor.
And what are you hearing from the agribusiness sector? Like, how are things looking over there?
Well, again, similar to agriculture, concern around the potential of weather impacting crops and yields this year, coming out of a very strong year. Hopefully people have got capital available to make equipment installations and those kinds of things. Agri-food in general is performing very well. Like I said, we've seen double-digit exports. We've seen growth in all of our exports from our region. And so, generally our tagline is, if you're in the food business, you should be here. You should be in Southern Alberta. Southern Alberta feeds the world, and we expect a hungry, glowing population around the world to need more of what we produce. So I think long term, Southern Alberta is going to be just fine. We just have to get through this next year and kind of see what the season is going to hold.
And switching gears a bit, what's the general outlook for the construction industry here?
Yeah, construction saw a bit of an employment gain last month, which was good. Like I said before, 500 jobs added in the construction industry. Although year to date, certainly construction is not where it has been historically, still down overall. I think a lot of that is being driven by the pullback in new home starts. So residential construction is down, and that's probably being driven by some of the interest rate increases we've seen from the Bank of Canada, cost of lending, those kinds of things. But where we have seen growth is actually in the non-residential sector. So that's things like institutional or government builds, that's commercial and industrial real estate. So we have seen gains in those areas, and there's a number of projects in the pipeline. There's roughly $1 billion worth of construction projects in the pipeline over the next few years. And so that's the encouraging thing for the construction sector. This is the most activity we've seen in a while for them. So optimistic there.
You briefly touched on this. We just had another interest rate hike from the Bank of Canada. What is the real estate sector looking like these days? Because I hear Lethbridge is still one of the most affordable cities not only in Alberta, but in Canada.
Yeah, you nailed it. That's exactly our key tactical advantage, is that we are one of the most affordable markets across Canada. Lethbridge is certainly a place where you can come build a life and have a great quality of life because it is reasonably affordable relative to the rest of the country. The challenge, of course, though, is that the Bank of Canada did raise interest rates this month, and they are likely expected again to do the same in July. So the cost of borrowing continues to go up. The central bank is very concerned about the impact of inflation, and they are overtly trying to slow down the economy and suppress growth. So it is a specific tactic that central banks do to control inflation. What that means, of course, is that new homes, getting into a new mortgage, changing up, exchanging homes, all of that is much more expensive than it was even a year ago. So we have seen a pullback in residential. New home sales, sort of same home sales, sort of the recycling in the market is fairly steady, but it's not perhaps as robust as it had been in previous years. We've also seen a bit of a pullback in commercial real estate, office and retail suffering a bit. Where we've seen strength in our market is industrial real estate. There's far more demand than there is supply at this point, in particular that 25 to 40,000 square foot sort of warehouse. We've seen lots of inquiries for that and just not any facilities to use. And the other thing about industrial real estate, there's been a number of studies point this out, that Lethbridge is even more affordable on the industrial side than anywhere in Canada. And so we've actually seen reports of BC businesses migrating from British Columbia to Alberta to take advantage of that. And I'll just have to point out to all of those interested parties from BC that Lethbridge has some of the cheapest industrial prices in all of Alberta. So again, there's opportunities there for us to pick up some business, I think.
And do you have any final thoughts on the direction of the Lethbridge economy over the next 6 months or so?
Yeah, I'm sure I sound like a broken record every time I'm invited on this show, but Lethbridge does have a reasonably diversified economy. You mentioned that right off the top. We're well positioned to ride out any troublesome waves that come our way for the rest of the year. Agri-food, of course, being a strong base, the public sector employers that we have being a strong base. Inside of the country, Alberta has one of the stronger economies expected this year. And so Alberta is well placed to ride out the storm as well. So I remain cautiously optimistic. That's not to say there isn't some challenges ahead or that some people aren't feeling pain. I don't want to minimize that. But overall, I think we're in a good position, and I remain very optimistic about Lethbridge's prospects.
Trevor Lewington is the CEO of Economic Development in Lethbridge. Trevor, thanks so much for being with us today.
Appreciate the opportunity once again.
I'm Naveen Day. On behalf of all of us here at Bridge City News, thanks for watching.